Hello, this is the May Be Mindful podcast, and I am your host, Hannah Mae. I'm a mother of 6, conscious birth instructor and educator, spiritual growth facilitator, and certified hypnotist. This podcast is about inspiring hope, expanding awareness and consciousness in order to revolutionize the way we live and experience our lives. You can expect thought-provoking episodes each week spanning a range of topics, drawing from both my own journey of transformation and healing and working with others. I hope you find this podcast to be informative, refreshing, illuminating, and instrumental in your own soul's evolution and growth. Let's jump right in. Welcome back to the May Be Mindful podcast. I am your host, Hannah Mae, and this week's episode is on humility and humility as a path to success, to stepping into and staying aligned in purpose and stepping into power. This is one of those words that people perceive in different ways. Sometimes it can tend to have a little bit of a negative connotation, like it's this very lowly, submissive, servile, I'm less than connotation. Or even weakness, like insufficiency and weakness, as opposed to a beautiful virtue and gift that allows us to accept help, to press into the simplicity of the helplessness of a child, and to accept help, spiritually speaking, from a benevolent, all-loving power that is completely unlimited. So just to read you one definition that I find, it says that humility is defined as modesty, lacking pretense, not believing that you are superior to others. And so in this way, it sort of right sizes us. It can allow space for our uniqueness, but it doesn't actually make sense, spiritually speaking, that anybody would be above or below anyone else if underneath our human component, and you remove every single material thing, every single circumstance or thing or appearance that you align with as your identity, if that is gone, then what are we underneath? We're soul, we're spirit, and we're part of a whole. And so nothing else other than this equality makes sense. So in that way, I think it can allow us to serve uniquely. It can take us out of any kind of comparison, and it can allow us to also acknowledge our own soul's unique purpose. And it can allow us to access that with a more pure intention. And so when there is a pure intention, it has to stay hand in hand with this virtue of humility in order to continue to be able to access that power and be a vessel and a channel for that power in purpose. We have to stay in alignment with and hold ourselves accountable to and stay in the practice of this disposition. I think I made sense. And so when I align with that, I can walk in that also and overcome and transcend the problems and the things that I otherwise beat my head senselessly against a wall and run into over and over again in my own efforts to control, my own attempts to manage. And like that control never bodes well. It always ends up landing me in a ditch or pissing other people off, leaving me annoyed with them. I mean, I don't know. Just take a look at it for yourself. These are not always easy things to look at because when humility is lacking, we think we know. But humility actually is saying, I don't know. And the reason why I don't know, or even the idea of maybe I don't know, even though I think I know is helpful, is because it leads to an open mind. And if I am undecided and I have an open mind, then I can accept a new concept, a new approach, a new belief, a new plan of action, a new state of being, a new experience that I was otherwise closed off to because I thought I knew. And as a result of that, pigeonholing my own experience and limiting myself. I think maybe one of the reasons why there's this negative connotation or idea around humility as something to avoid is, well, A, sometimes life has a way of just humbling us as a natural cause and effect situation. If we don't make an effort to stay humble in our disposition and stay right sized and think we're better than, and maybe things don't apply to us, life does have a way of checking us. Like that time where I lost my license twice because I didn't think the law applied to me and I just kept driving recklessly, zero regard for the rules there. Yeah, life has a way of bursting your bubble, popping your balloon if you get too high, and then you're going to be deflated and not able to drive your car with no license for 6 months. That doesn't feel good. Nobody wants to get popped out of the sky and land on the ground. That's just natural cause and effect as a result of my lack of consideration. I was like 19, I think, when that happened, by the way, it was a long ass time ago. I'm not gonna say I drive like a grandma now because I still have to check myself, but I really value my independence. And I also, due to the sheer amount of traffic schools that I had to do in order to get that work it back, I learned a lot of interesting information that actually helps me on the road and has probably contributed to my safety and survival in some cases. In addition, is this perception of just how we perceive words in the human language, the meaning that we give it. And as far as how humility is defined in the Bible, it is fear of the Lord, at least one way it's defined. And I think it's important to understand that when they use the word fear in these early translations, it was not thought of and used in the way we use it now, which is maybe like a trembling, servile, scared, afraid fear. It was used to describe a profound reverence. According to the early translations, it meant profound reverence and respect for the Lord and for that omnipotence and that power. And there's a real difference, right? There's a difference there. So one cultivates trust in that. And it allows me to not have to stay so self-sufficient and just totally relying only on myself. And it allows me to trust and know that I'm held and know that there is a power that is going to hold me versus being not willing to trust that power and being totally cut off from that based on why would I do that if I'm afraid of something? And so, practically speaking, if I don't know my way and I need directions, I allow my pride, which is the opposite of humility, to say, well, I don't want to ask for directions because I don't want to look like I don't know where I'm going. I know where I'm going. Even if I don't, then I'm not going to be as likely to find my way. And if I'm willing to ask for directions, then I'm more likely to get where I'm wanting to go in a timely manner with a lot less aggravation and ease. And so, practically speaking, it just makes a little more sense. And also to look at the nuance here with pride. I can have pride in something I do. I can be proud of who I am. I can be proud of my child and still be humbled in that, in the acknowledgement that I am creating something as a co-creator, right? It's not all about me. The way that the word genius was originally used was not to describe somebody, it was to describe their genius. So they would say, your genius versus you are a genius. One is taking ownership for something, and the other one is essentially acknowledging that it is coming from something bigger and it's like a give glory situation rather than owning that glory as yours and being self-righteous about it. And so if we're going to take it way back biblically and go, okay, here we have Lucifer, who was the most beautiful, bright, brilliant, luminous angel. Apparently, he was the head of music, which is fascinating. I'll let you think about that one on your own. He was very taken with his own beauty, and he thought he was better than God, his creator. And so what did he do? He rebelled for his own glorification, rallied his other angels, and there was a great battle in heaven. And Saint Michael, the archangel who led the good angels, fought against Lucifer and his angels that would be the fallen angels. And his battle cry, his victory cry that the good angels chanted as they went into battle was, "Who is like unto God?" And so in that humility and acknowledgement of what they were fighting for and who they were fighting for, they were victorious. And so Lucifer lost his brilliant countenance and descended into darkness and ugliness. And thus we have these two vastly oppositional spiritual forces here at play. At least that is one perception and understanding of what's happening, spiritually speaking, that we don't see. And so it's interesting to me because historically speaking, this is how it's played out. Pride and evil is a force. It is a powerful force, and it can yield some short-term results, but ultimately, does it win? The answer is no, it doesn't win. Ultimately, goodness wins. And so it's force versus power. And both are powerful, but one is very counterintuitive, per usual, to our human instincts, which is to be humble in order to step into and therefore align with power, versus being haughty, heady, proud, thinking it's about me, aligning with force in order to make something happen out of self-propulsion and self-serving, self-seeking desires for your own glorification rather than to serve the good of the whole. You see this all the time. People will be successful for so long until they're just not. And eventually the covers get pulled and it all comes out in the wash. It's playing out as we speak. I think that it is in our human nature to want to rebel, and the ego wants to respond and say no and to prove ourselves rather than to be a channel, rather than to allow and step into and align with power, which is very grounded in humility and the acknowledgement that it is not about me and what I think I want or I think I need, because it also says that I know what's best. It says, I know what's best for you. It says, I know what's best for everybody. And I can really believe and know that I know what's best, even when it meets with a high and holy ideal of like, this is what would be best. Justice here would be best. But the fact of the matter is that I don't see big picture. I don't know anybody that actually does, except for as wisdom dictates that they don't see big picture. And there is a thing called providence, called divine providence, that does see big picture and does understand. I feel like a preacher right now. And so in that surrender and in that humble acknowledgement, we can allow for what is best to unfold without interfering so much. Because really, when we step into this self-propulsion, like based on what we think is best without pause, we just end up causing a whole bunch of interference. And in fact, even the obsessive thought and worry carries an energy. If I'm not allowing for somebody else's spiritual growth, this is a whole nother chat, then it's creating an energy, an energetic interference in that person's growth. And I have experienced and seen it many times when I detach and I say, okay, maybe I don't know. And I step back and I trust that something bigger is at work and at play, even though it might feel or look scary and not good the way it's playing out. It really has allowed for it to play out more efficiently when I'm willing to remove my judgment and detach and stop interfering, there's a space that's cleared, and there is a natural process that can unfold with ease when I am in trust. And it's almost like it almost feels sometimes like this nod, this spiritual nod and acknowledgement, like, thank you. I don't think that spirit needs me to cooperate or not cooperate in order for it to be what it is, except that we are all part of a whole and we are all participating in the field here. And every thought, every action carries an energy and has an impact, whether we understand it or not. So, in this softening and in this allowance, uh, flow, divine flow is allowed. So, in aligning with the concept of force versus power, I wanted to read you something from David Hawkins' book, Map of Consciousness Explained, because he really, really speaks to this. And in this book, he explains the different and measures the vibrational frequency of these different levels of consciousness. And he says regarding pride, on the level of pride, for example, inflation is the process going on within consciousness that is of particular danger in our society, with the contentious narcissism of I'm right at both ends of the political spectrum, and the ego inflation of the megalomaniac who leads the masses to their deaths. This phenomenon can be observed historically, and he gives these examples. In the case of Napoleon, whose level of consciousness started out quite high at 450, as a very good tactician and genius at mathematics and other accomplishments. Then, suddenly, when he crowned himself emperor, his level dropped below 200. The Pope had always crowned the heads of Europe, but Napoleon crowned himself. The ultimate self-inflation. In that instant, his calibrated level went from 450 to 175. When he faced the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo, Napoleon's intention was at 75, and thus he was defeated. The same thing happened with Hitler, who dropped from 430 to 40. When megalomania hits a leader, the populace is not aware that it has happened. At the beginning, Hitler's programs advanced society, Audubon and so forth. Then suddenly he crashed and the monster emerged. What had been a great benefactor became the great killer of society, with people maybe who have an incredible gift of leadership and are able to be uniquely of service, or healers even. And then somewhere along the way, they become prideful and arrogant, and it becomes about them versus their greater soul's purpose. And you watch it turn, and then suddenly you have somebody who has this incredible gift of leadership and helping people, and suddenly they're like a cult leader, and you're like, oh, I guess they're going to be a cult leader now. And they're like, hey, come drink my Kool-Aid. And people listen to them because they were lured in by their gift. And I've seen it again and again where it starts to turn and it becomes about that person. You know, when you have people in the healing profession, and I see it here too, I've experienced it here too, where people who are coming to them very vulnerable. And so there is an incredible responsibility there. And you see them take advantage of that vulnerability for their own selfish ends. So one can only assume here that at some point along the way, they lost that humility. They were no longer that channel of healing. They became selfish and prideful in their own gifting and thinking that they are better than or above. Time and time again, you see where it bites people in the ass. But the problem is that when you are in that low vibrational state, and so in this book, he explains that force is of a lower vibration than power. And so, in accordance with the field of dominance principle, the higher vibration is the attractor, and the lower vibration is going to have to conform to the attractor. So, the power, the humility is always going to yield the win. It's always going to yield the victory no matter what. And so whether you want to talk about it scientifically or whether you want to say it's good versus evil or positive versus negative, it's just always going to win out. If you look at any program or formula that works, it really aligns with this. So the 12-step program of recovery, for example, the first step of which is admitted you were powerless over blank, whatever your blank is, and that your life had become unmanageable. And this allows the person to accept a new way that is outlined in the rest of the steps in order to get recovered and have a spiritual experience in order to help overcome their problems. So, like, most people leave that program believing in some idea of God, higher power. They don't necessarily all agree on what that is, but their repeated attempts to do something that led them to failure and ultimately pain and self-destruction over and over again allowed them to have an open mind to where they stopped trying to do it themselves, relying simply on their own human resources that were not working and were continuing to yield more and more pain and self-destruction and a good amount of harm in most cases to those around them, to the point where they're not even acceptable members of society, perhaps, to accept a whole new program as a result of this defeat. So humility was really this incredible gift here in order to bridge this gap from self-reliance. So from their mind relying on self to their heart, from reason to the desired shore of faith, and to be able to find power. And the beauty of the steps is that you get recovered and then you get your power back where you didn't have any before. And that is by accessing a power that is greater than yourself. And doesn't that require a little bit of humility? So when I was about 19 and really in the throes of my own addiction and pain and many countless failed attempts, and I was seeking so hard, I stumbled across a book by St. Augustine called Confessions. And he, interestingly, is considered the patron saint of addiction. And I starred and underlined this one paragraph because it really hit home for me. And it sort of gave me this visual that helped me to understand, digest, and begin to embody the concepts that we're talking about. So St. Augustine, in his youth, lived this very decadent, self-indulgent, wayward existence. And he was always searching, but never really satisfied. And he ended up, when his efforts ended up really humbling him and putting him in a good amount of pain, descended into the dark night of the soul, and he came out transformed. And then his life looked very different from that point on. And he is considered a doctor of the church and this incredible theologian. And he wrote a lot of incredible stuff. And so I'm just going to read to you something that he wrote. And he's talking about God, right? And he says, he was calling to me and saying, I am the way, I am truth and life. He it was who united with our flesh that food which I was too weak to take, for the word was made flesh, so that your wisdom, by which you created all things, might be milk to suckle us in infancy. For I was not humble enough to conceive of the humble Christ as my God, nor had I learned what lesson his human weakness was meant to teach. The lesson is that your word, the eternal truth, which far surpasses even the higher parts of your creation, raises up to himself all who subject themselves to him. From the clay of which we were made, he built for himself a lowly house in this world below, so that by this means he might cause those who were to be made subject to him to abandon themselves and come over to his side. He would cure them of the pride that swelled up in their hearts and would nurture love in its place, so that they should no longer stride ahead confident in themselves, but might realize their own weakness when at their feet they saw God himself, enfeebled by sharing his garment of our mortality. And at last, from weariness, they would cast themselves down upon his humanity. And when it rose, they too would rise. And I just was so impacted by the visual that presented for me, which was like this sort of deflated, shriveled garment on the ground, that when I admitted defeat and stopped trying my countless vain attempts that weren't working and accepted help, then I was able to rise and transcend and overcome. And that has really been my experience. And so I think there's a good amount of trust, and there's a good amount of things that we bump into when we're faced with doing that, because what if we don't trust? That's a whole nother conversation, because it's like, well, there could be things blocking me. There could be ideas and beliefs in the way that I perceive this power. But at the end of the day, I know I'm not the alpha and the omega, right? You probably do too, hopefully. And so I think the gifts along this path are not always so obvious at first sight, but once we do something and we experience the benefit, then we're more likely to do it again and then start to build and strengthen that muscle, which is really a spiritual muscle, and build endurance, and then eventually have this be an automatic response and have it be like, oh, something's not working. And so then your tolerance for that is going to lessen, which is actually a very good thing, because then you're not going to keep doing something that doesn't work, because you're like, well, why would I do that? That doesn't make any sense. And so in that way, we can see clearly, and we can begin to see the mystery of this, and it can become more spiritually intuitive, and that can win out over our lower nature and over the lower self. It's kind of amazing to think about to me when I'm like, don't these like people know, these evil leaders and dictators or anybody with an agenda that's causing a good amount of harm? Don't they like understand how this plays out? Like, it doesn't end well for them. It doesn't end well. They're going to go to jail. It's not going to be good. They're not going to be remembered in a good way, but the thing is when people are operating in that lower vibrational state, when they're operating from a place of force and pride, their vision and truth is so obstructed because they're not actually able to see truth. They're operating and they have come into agreement with a lie. So if that clouds your perception and that is what you're viewing life out of, and you've painted your town red with that lie, then that's all you're going to see. It's really only until we're willing to peel back the layers of that delusion or belief that we got somehow, somewhere, or that we came into agreement with, that we can start to see it differently and therefore act differently. So as with any of these topics, I just am sharing with you what is coming up and coming through now, my own cumulative experience as I see it today. And, it might change and evolve to something else tomorrow. But as always, I look forward to hearing your feedback or any thoughts that it inspired for you. Be well, soul seekers. Until next time. Thank you for tuning in to the May Be Mindful podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us grow and improve. For more information, resources, and exclusive content, visit our website at maybemindful.com, or go ahead and follow us over on Instagram at maybemindful. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please give me a follow, screenshot the episode, and go ahead and tag me until next week when I bring you another thought-provoking and inspiring topic. Until then,